You okay out there? The other day, one of my friends, we were talking about movies online, and he said, "When are you going to do a movie top 10 on this actor?" And he mentioned another actor as well. And obviously, the last movie thing I did, or the only one I did, was James Bond. So I thought, let's do it. It's this guy who was 90 the other day in May 31st, I think. And for me, he's my favourite film star of all time. There's other actors who are better, but as a film star, as a movie icon, I think he's probably maybe the greatest, certainly one of the greatest, and that is Clint Eastwood. I'll not do a big spiel about his history. Basically, he's born in the 1930s, he's born into depression, he's born into poverty, like a lot of actors who became big at that time. He jobs about. I can't remember whether he did any time in the military or not. Then he kind of finds his way into acting. He ends up bit parts. He ends up in TV. He does a show called Rawhide. That's very successful. And like Steve McQueen and Burt Reynolds, he manages to break out of TV into movies, which is a very hard thing to do. A lot of actors have tried it. And he first finds stardom in Europe in the Fistful of Dollars film, and then A Few Dollars More, then The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. But the Fistful of Dollars and A Few Dollars More not released until 1966 at the American box office, and that's when he becomes a movie star proper. He becomes a superstar in 1971 with the film Dirty Harry. And pretty much from then on, he's one of the biggest stars in the global box office, in the American box office. So the first thing I thought I'd do is quickly just go through a few films that didn't make the cut that I really like of his. You've got a couple of interesting films in 1968, Coogan's Bluff, Hang 'em High. Hang 'em High is a western, but it kind of breaks him out of the spaghetti western. It's his first American western. It's interesting for that, and it's got a kind of revenge plot about lynchings. He gets wrongly lynched but survives, and that's a theme that's going to emerge with Clint, is like him surviving death and coming back in his films. And then Coogan's Bluff, that's his first cop film, so he stars the cowboy Attar in it. It actually got turned into a TV series later on called McCloud with Dennis Weaver, who you may know from the film Duel, Steven Spielberg's debut. So he does those couple of films, and then a cool one from 1970, Kelly's Heroes, a good couple of anarchic war film he did. I like that. Another interesting one early on, 1972, is Joe Kidd. It's another western. This is probably his least well-known western. You very rarely see it on TV. But it's interesting. It's directed by John Sturges. It's got Robert Duvall as a villain. I think he's to be fussed about it, but if you watch it now, it's got great sort of autumnal cinematography. It's a little bit cold and frosty. But Clint wears like a kind of smart suit at the start with a bowler hat, a bit like Warren Beatty in McCabe and Mrs. Miller, or Christian Bale if you saw the film Hostiles, the western. At the end of that film, he's dressed in that attire. So it's kind of at that end of the century, turning the next century, and the Wild West coming to an end. And it's a decent film. It looks good. It's not brilliant, but it's worth checking out. And then a few other ones, another one from the 70s I like, which is ridiculous, but it's Clint getting on a spy film, and I know a lot of people like this, is the Eiger Sanction. Basically, he plays a teacher who's used to be a secret agent. He gets bought out of retirement by this kind of villainous guy, head of some government agency called the Dragon, played by an actor called Fair David. He's an albino, not the actor, but the character is sort of typically playing up to those Bondian villain tropes of having some sort of health issue or facial disfigurement. Basically, it's got proper rock climbing sequences with professional climbers on the north face of the Eiger, which is one of the hardest climbs to do. And Clint actually, he's actually photographed properly on the rock face. And it's good fun. It's a film I've always liked. It's got a pretty funky score. Clint's pretty cool in it. So it did okay at the time, but it's always a film of his I've liked. Then a couple of later ones, one of his few 80s ones, which is good fun. It's cheesy, but it's Heartbreak Ridge. I know a lot of people like that. Some great dialogue in that. It did quite well at the time. He plays a gruff gunnery sergeant. He has to train a bunch of, ne'er-do-wells. Some hilarious dialogue in it. It's pretty Reaganite, the whole plot, but it's worth checking out. And then moving into the 90s, Bridges of Madison County, the beautiful autumnal romance film that he directed. It was pretty close to making the top 10, that. Great performances with him and Meryl Streep. You wouldn't think that Clint could play such that type of character, but he pulls it off, and it's a really kind of affecting film. Great piece of work from him. And then again, late sort of directorial, great film by him. I've only seen it once. I need to watch it again. It was $1 Million Baby. It won him the Oscar for Best Director. He was nominated as Best Actor. It's a really good film. I think, you know, since it's come out as a criticism that it's really the film's about him and not the female character played by Hilary Swank. And I think that's a good point. So I need to watch it again. So I'll go through my top 10. I will bring in other films as we go through this. I'm looking down my list. It's all a bit haphazardous. But number 10, I'm going for his 1973 Western High Plains Drifter. This is his second film as a director. It's basically a supernatural Western. There's not many supernatural Westerns. There's another one which Clint made called Pale Rider, which we'll come to. And there's a really obscure one called Shadow of Chikara. If you ever get to see that, it's hardly ever on TV. It's got Sondra Locke in it, who was Clint's girlfriend for a long time, partner, and Joe Don Baker, but that's kind of a supernatural Western. Eagle's Wing as well. Maybe it's that got some elements, maybe. Anyway, that was Martin Sheen. But I've waffled there. High Plains Drifter, so basically it opens up with kind of it's set in probably Californian desert. You kind of like a mirage shot. Clint rides in, almost ghostly, from the from the desert. There's a town and it's pretty shoddy. The sheriff's corrupt, and basically as the plot goes on, he kind of takes over the town and he offers to protect the town from the sort of marauding group of cattle rustlers or bandits who are coming in. But basically what's happened is the previous marshal has been killed. The town has cowardly let this happen. It's kind of like High Noon, I suppose. In High Noon, Gary Cooper, no one comes out to help him, but he blats the bad guys anyway. But in this, no one's come to help him and the marshal's died. But the inference is at the end that Clint is the marshal and he's come back somehow reincarnated or in some kind of physical form. And he's exacting his revenge. He basically lets the town go to... He gets the villains, but he kind of lets the town go to rack and ruin to teach them a lesson, really. It's got a great ending. The guy goes, "I never caught your name," and he kind of goes, "Oh, you know who I am." And the other cool bit is when he gets rid of the villains, uses a whip, and the marshal who's died originally has been whipped to death. So it's a really good film. It's really well made. It's taken elements of the spaghetti western, the Man with No Name character that he developed with Sergio Leone. It's got great photography, really slickly shot, and it's a really an early sort of Clint directorial classic. And that brings me to my number 9, which his debut as a film director, which is 1971's Play Misty for Me. I love this film. It took me a long time to see it. I didn't see it till the mid-80s. Always love the opening shot, going in over the water in Carmel, California. Clint's driving up in his sports car. Basically, this is the Fatal Attraction plot. When Fatal Attraction came out, people were like, "Oh, this is like Play Misty for Me." It's really cool. Clint plays a DJ. He plays like a Dave Garber, he's called. He's got like a cool radio show. And there's a listener who rings in, "Will you play Misty for me?" He ends up seeing this fan, but she starts stalking him. It has to be said, Clint doesn't treat her particularly well, and if you're looking at it now, the attitudes towards relationships with women isn't very good. But it's a cool 70s film. I was lucky enough to go to Carmel probably 15 years ago. We drove through, and it was nice to be in that area. It has unusual trees on the Californian coastline around Monterey. I think they go to Monterey Jazz Festival, actually. If you watch Big Little Lies, the TV show, that's set in Monterey, and there's a bridge that they always go over at the start of that. But anyway, I'm digressing. Play Misty for Me is set in this area. It's got a really tense climax, a great performance by Jessica Walter as the psycho ex-girlfriend. It's really slickly made, 100 minutes long, really good thriller, and it just shows Clint's skills that he got from Sergio Leone and particularly Don Siegel. I think in a lot of ways, when he's doing westerns, obviously Sergio, but the economy of his of the way he makes films is very much from Don Siegel, and we'll be hearing more about Don Siegel. So that's like number 9. just remembered I missed one film out of my top films, which is, of course, Escape from Alcatraz. Should mention that as a great prison film. That merely made the top 10. That was his last film he made with the director Don Siegel. If you haven't seen it, it's one of the all-time great prison films. You know, probably second to Shawshank. And Patrick McGowan plays a brilliant, prison warden in that. So number 8, I'm going for his 1974 classic buddy movie, and that's Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. So this is with Jeff Bridges, and Jeff Bridges steals the show. He actually gets an Oscar nomination for this. He plays Lightfoot. Clint Eastwood's a robber, Thunderbolt. Somehow their paths cross and they team up to do a job, and then they get involved with a character played by George Kennedy. I forget, is it Red Leary he's called? George Kennedy often appears in Clint films. He's in the Eiger Sanction. There's a great chemistry between Clint and Jeff Bridges, and it's just really poignant film. I think it's set in Montana, so it's got beautiful vistas. But more interesting, it's written and directed by Michael Cimino. So Michael Cimino wrote Dirty Harry, I think, or Magnum Force. He's a co-writer on one of those. Actually, I think it's Magnum Force. And this is his debut film. Obviously, he would go on and make The Deer Hunter, and then tank his career by making Heaven's Gate, the biggest flop at the time. But interestingly enough, this film's made in that era where you can have quirky sort of character films for stars. So, it's part of that new Hollywood in a way, where there's just bizarre sequences. It's got a leisurely pace. There's a weird sequence where a guy, I can't remember, they kind of had an altercation. This guy's got like a car, and then they open the boot and it's just full of bunny rabbits. This guy's a bit nuts. I can't remember if they nicked the car. I'm not sure. I've not seen it for a while, but it's a really, really good film. And I think Clint felt a bit upstaged by Jeff Bridges, but Jeff Bridges went on to be one of the great screen actors and an Oscar winner. Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, really, really good piece of 70s cinema. One of the few times I think Clint's worked with like a first-class director. He's either often directing himself or kind of getting one of his guys from his crew to do it after this. But in this instance, Cimino did go on to make another great film. So number 7 is a real cult Clint Eastwood film. This film flopped at the time. Again, it's from 1971. What a year, 1971 was for Clint Eastwood. He makes Play Misty for Me. He makes this film, Dirty Harry. This is The Beguiled. This was recently remade, by Sofia Coppola, but it wasn't very good. This version is Don Siegel directing. I would describe it as American Gothic, so it's something that's unusual in American cinema, where you get a period piece, often set in the Deep South, but it's just kind of really Gothic. And so you have like a girls' school set in the Civil War. He plays, which side? He's dressed in blue. I don't know, like Confederate, I'm probably wrong. And he's injured, they take him in, but then basically what happens, obviously, because he's the only man in the house, it awakens the sexuality of the women, and various women and the girls and the head mistress are played off against each other, sometimes by his character. And it's, it goes pretty dark, but it's just beautifully shot. It's, it's got an amazing look, amazing photography. And so I think it's quite a personal sort of statement from Don Siegel. It was unusual for him to make this kind of film. So we'll talk more about Don in a bit. So The Beguiled, number 7. Where's number 6? Number 6, this is one of his great comeback films. Basically, at the start of the 90s, Clint Eastwood's had a lean spell. He has success in the 80s, and then he does the film Pale Rider. That does pretty well, and Heartbreak Ridge. So these aren't big hits, but they're solid. But then he has a flop with a film called Pink Cadillac, and that's still the only Clint Eastwood film I haven't seen. I must get around to that. And then he moves on to a sequel to Dirty Harry, the 5th Dirty Harry film, Deadpool. That's not very good. Is Axl Rose in that? I can't remember. Anyway, and then he does quite an interesting film called White Hunter Black Heart, where he plays a kind of version of John Huston. He's hunting an elephant. based on John Huston's time shooting The African Queen. And that doesn't do well, but it gets quite good critical respect. Then 92, we won't mention what happens there, but he comes back. And then 93, he makes the next film after that, and that is 1993's In the Line of Fire. It's a great thriller. He plays a Secret Service agent who's kept guard over presidents going back to Kennedy, but he's always been haunted by the assassination of Kennedy. Basically, the new guy's running for re-election, and then they start getting threatening letters, phone calls, that a guy is going to try and assassinate the president. And this guy is played by John Malkovich. John Malkovich got an Oscar nomination for this. He's absolutely one of the great villains of cinema for me. Absolutely brilliant. And Clint just rises to the challenge. He has great dialogue scenes with him over the phone. Clint's quite touching in it. He kind of shows new layers. He even gets a little bit... He's sexist at first, but he kind of goes a little bit feminist later on, because he says he offers to quit his job, so he can support the female agent played by Rennie Russo that he started seeing in her profession. Obviously, Clint is in his 60s, his character in his 50s, so yeah, he probably would be nearing retirement, but we'll give him that. So it's got really tense. It's directed by Wolfgang Peterson, who did Das Boot, the original Das Boot, so it's really slickly made. It's got really good plot points. The mechanics of the plot work really well. It's one of my favourite plot points, involving a bank account and old school telephone number dials, which, it's a kind of plot point that can happen now. And it's just really well paced. I remember going to see the pitch and just thinking, this is great. And it's still, I watched it recently and I was like, yeah, that's one of my top Clint films. So coming in at number 5 is his 1992 comeback, his masterpiece, Unforgiven. So basically this film grossed $100 million. He wins in the US box office. He wins the Best Director, Best Film. He's nominated for Best Actor for the first time ever. It's basically a great revisionist Western. It looks at kind of violence, what violence does to men. At the start, his family dies from disease, and he gets offered money, bounty, to go and avenge a prostitute who's been attacked. But as the film goes on, the story about what's happened to the prostitute gets more ridiculous, and it's basically playing on that idea that a lot of myths of the Old West are kind of hearsay and tales that have been over-egged. There's a character played by Richard Harris in it called English Bob, and he has a guy going around who's writing his life story, and this guy is going to write a kind of, have pictures and writing to tell the story, but a lot of what English Bob's telling him is bullshit. But what happens at the end of the film is you find out that Clint is actually more terrifying than you realise. You find out he's been this ex-gunslinger, he's done horrible things, maybe, but at the end of the film, he's absolutely quite frightening. And I remember it's very oppressive. It's at night, it's in the rain. And when I saw the pictures, it was quite a heavy, oppressive sort of feeling it created. I think it's just incredible. The climax of Unforgiven is an incredible piece of filmmaking. So yeah, it's a modern masterpiece. It's one of the great films of the 90s, one of the great westerns. So that's my number 5. Number 4, this just picked it, and it's his, I can't remember which number film, it might be his 4th film as director, and this is 1976's Outlaw Josie Wales. So it's another Western masterpiece. This is the last great Western of the 70s. Basically, after 76, there's a few Westerns made. They try and reboot them in 85 with Silverado and Pale Rider. It doesn't quite work. By that point, Sam Peckinpah's kind of made his last Western as well. So Clint, Outlaw Josie Wales, superb. He's basically a peaceful farmer. His family get murdered by soldiers. Again, I can't remember which side. He becomes a kind of outlaw in the Civil War, but he's travelling across country, and he kind of picks up a surrogate family. There's a Native American guy played by Chief Dan George, who's great. He picks up a woman, Sandra Locke, his then partner. Guy Sam Bottoms, young gunslinger. He has quite a poignant death scene. There's a great bit with guy selling snake oil in it. It's just got touches in it that you don't always see in other westerns, but it's the idea that he's basically lost everything, and by getting this surrogate family and going almost on this revenge. At the end of it, that provides some sort of catharsis, and then he can go on and back to some kind of new normal. John Vernon is in it, and he's in the Dirty Harry film as well. You might remember him. He's also in Point Blank, the Lee Marvin film. But there's a really good scene at the end, where he knows Josie, but he kind of lets him go. The other thing Clint does in that film is he chews tobacco, and when he kills someone, he spits it on them. Loads of black tar. But it's a superb film, and it's another Clint masterpiece. Okay, so number 3 is another, one of the all-time classic Clint films. This is the film that made him a superstar, and it's 1971's Dirty Harry. So this is his second film with Don Siegel as director, I think. I think it predates The Beguiled. They first got together on Coogan's Bluff. So Don Siegel's basically come from B-movies in the 1950s. His first great B-movie is Rive and Cell Block 11, and then he makes a really awesome Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I think that's 56. So what Don Siegel does is he's great at doing crime films, but he's economical. He has an economy of style to his filmmaking. He doesn't overshoot stuff. He doesn't give you more information you need. He doesn't give you less. He was a guy, I think, who shot fast. He shot lean. He shot mean. And he has like a really good, his cinematic book is actually better than people realise. Aside from his Clint films, he does a cop film called Madigan that's very good. A film called The Line-Up. He did a great version of Ernest Hemingway's The Killers, which he made for TV with Lee Marvin in America, but got released in the UK at the cinema. It's superb. He does Escape from Alcatraz with Clint. There's a great Walter Matthau film called Charlie Varick. Pretty good Michael Caine film called The Black Windmill. So he's one of those guys. He's got a lot of films. Dirty Harry's brilliantly shot by him and his cinematographer. The opening shot with the gun on the top with a wide angle lens, and another shot in this where he meets a Scorpio killer at a big crucifix in a park in San Francisco, and it's got this fantastic overhead shot. But Clint basically plays, he plays the kind of very, very right wing, some would say fascist cop, Dirty Harry Callahan. It's an iconic film. It's got one of the all-time villains for me, the Scorpio killer, superbly tapping into this Charles Manson thing where you've got the hippie looking guy who's actually a psychopath. He's got like a mangled belt buckle, which is a peace sign. So good. And it just climaxes great. Again, it's really lean, 100 minutes, brilliant musical score by Lalo Schifrin. It's a massive hit, and it spawns 4 sequels. And of those, the second one, Magnum Force, now that would have made me top 10, but what I decided on this was just to kind of pick different films. So on another day, and I would maybe say I prefer Magnum Force to some of these films in here. But it's a great sequel. What it tries to do is address the kind of fascist element of Dirty Harry, and you have some rogue police officers killing people in that. They're kind of a death squad, and Clint's character is basically on the trail of them, and they try and recruit him, but he basically says, look, you might think I'm like that, but I'm not. It's got a brilliant ending. The only thing that lets it down is directed by a guy called Ted Post, who came from TV. He directed the second Planet of the Apes film, Beneath the Planet of the Apes. He's perfectly serviceable journeyman, but he hasn't got the touch that Don Siegel has. This film's a little longer, so it's not quite as slightly paced, but it's got some really cool bits. And you got David Soul as one of the cops. Tim, I can't remember his second name, Tim. He's in loads of stuff, and then it's got Dan Tanner from Vegas, Robert Ulrich, he's one of the cops. And Hal Holbrook's in it, the great Hal Holbrook as Harry's boss. Brilliant final scene with him. Man's got to know his limitations. So yeah, Magnum Force, excellent. Dirty Harry sequel. After that, the Enforcer is pretty cheesy, it's alright. Quite interesting, she's got a female cop character. Again, trying to address Clint Eastwood sort of sexism, doesn't entirely work. Sudden Impact, that's quite a vicious rape revenge film. Doesn't age as well, that. And then the Deadpool. So that's my number 3, that's one of my favourite films. So my number 2 is, it's not necessarily the best piece of filmmaking. And I was kind of debating whether to put this in because Clint isn't the star in this film, he's one of the stars. But I had to put it in because it's been a film that's been a huge part of my life. It's one of the first memories I have of going to the cinema. Basically, my father took me and my two brothers to see it on a rerun at the Royalty Cinema in Bowness, if you know that, the Lake District. And that is some places say it's 1969, but I think it comes out right at the end of 1968 in Britain. So it's Where Eagles Dare, the World War II classic. So basically, Clint's he's the second lead in this. Richard Burton is the star. Obviously, by this point, Burton's a 43-year-old pockmark alcoholic, so of course he would go on a mission, when it's guys back in the war who are 21, 22. But Burton's fantastic in this. He's so charismatic, he uses his voice to full effect. It's got some of the most famous lines, broadsword calling Danny Boy and that. There's a fantastic scene at the end where Burton spills the whole plot of the beans around this big table. It's great. So Clint's job in this is to basically be the man of action, not words. So a lot of the dialogue exposition was given to Burton. Clint did that Steve McQueen thing. Let the other guy talk. I'm going to look cool. He's absolutely fantastic. Basically, he's brought in as an outsider onto the mission. He's Lieutenant Schaefer. He's just basically a one-man death machine. If you want to know where Schwarzenegger, Stallone, all these guys got that persona from, it's from this film. Basically, he must kill about 30 Nazis. If you're into war films and stuff like that, and you're kind of a little vicious little boy like me, in some ways, Clint uses a silencer a lot in this film. So when he kills someone, he'll say something disarming, and then he'll just pump and go. And it's great. The silencer sound, a real silencer would probably make very little sound at all, but this has got really good pumping sound. So when he's dispatching people, he's like, vroom, vroom. There's bits with machine guns. He throws back grenades. When I was younger, when I first went to see this at the pictures, there's a great bit when they enter the castle on a cable car. And at one point, Clint's kind of sliding down this roof and he's going to fall to his death. And I was absolutely... In the cinema, I was like, oh, God, don't let him die. Because at that point, I didn't know who Clint Eastwood was. I didn't know he was this big star. And I was just totally invested in this character. And when Burton rescues him, I was just so relieved at the pictures. Obviously, now I'd know they probably wouldn't kill off one of the main stars halfway through. But it was a great it was a great moment for me. I really treasured, probably my most treasured cinema memory. So that's Where Eagles Dare. I think what is the difference with this film is it's got a journeyman director. The other films I've picked are either all directed by Clint or very like Michael Cimino, Wolfgang Peterson. They're very good filmmakers. Whereas Brian G. Hutton didn't really do much else in his career. But this film's really well made, it's great fun, it's got great stunts, it's basically a war film where it doesn't take war seriously. By that point, the war film was kind of a boy's own adventure, really. And they weren't really too concerned with the politics of the whole thing, It's just like, let's get out and kick ass. I bloody love it, so that's why it's made number 2. Fantastic music as well, which brings me to number 1 on the list. Of course, I mentioned fantastic music, and it's the 3rd film in the Dollars trilogy. It's one of the all-time masterpieces of cinema, and that is The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. So, basically, I would put Fistful of Dollars and A Few Dollars More in, because they're great films. Certainly A Few Dollars More love a lot. But again, I just wanted to kind of space it out with different genres and films. So basically, Jersey Only, they make a Fistful of Dollars based on Akira Kurosawa's Jimbo. Clint becomes a star in Europe. They make the sequel, bringing Lee Van Cleef for A Fistful of Dollars. Sorry, A Few Dollars More. And Leone starts to develop his style in that. He has the classic scene with the watch, and he's got like the foreground shot of that and the deep focus and the shots with the guns, the holster. And Ennio Morricone really develops his musical score with this film. So when they come to Good, the Bad and the Ugly, basically they've got their kind of shots together. Morricone's got his musical score ideas together. They're giving a lot more money, and they basically just make one of the greatest films of all time. There's no point in going about all the sequences. Clint's amazing in it. You've got to say Eli Wallach is probably the great performance in it. Clint's job is to be iconic, stoic, being a man with no name. Lee Van Cleef's job is to look cool and be villainous. Eli Wallach plays the more complicated character, and his character arc, the way it switches between the two's really, really, really cool, and it's something I didn't really pick up on as much when I was younger. The climax is stunning. You can actually go up to that set. It's outside Bilbao in Spain. If you go on Netflix, there's a documentary about that. The name's escaping me at the moment. But it's just, there's any number of moments in this film that are great. I think there's an argument Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West may be a better film. If it's not better, it's certainly as good or nearly as good. But it's my all-time favourite Clint film. I saw this when I was younger. In actual fact, I saw half of it when I was younger. But because it was so long, I couldn't stay up that late. So I watched kind of half of it. And then I think the next time it was on TV, maybe I was allowed to stay up and watch it. We just saw it on a little black and white TV. And I saw it like that for years, and then it had a showing of it at the Tyneside Cinema back in the late 90s, early noughties, and I went to see it, and that was the first time I saw it properly in a widescreen. And then you really do notice the shot compositions more. This film has to be seen. It can't be panned and scanned. So yeah, that's my top 10 Clint Eastwood films. I know there's been a bit of a backlash in America against Clint because of his politics. I think he's gone a bit more right wing. I always saw him as the right wing, but he's kind of a little centrist as well. If you look into his films, and there's been some strange bits with kind of a lot of racist language in the film Gran Torino, which is a good film. There's a kind of weird bit in that, and then in The Mule, his most recent film, there's a weird bit where he's talking about Mexicans and stuff, and yeah, it's quite strange. But I think the thing is with Clint is he's making blue collar films. He's making films, and he's always made films. Like if you take his Clyde Orangutan films, Any Which Way You Can and Every Which Way But Loose. Sorry, the wrong way around there. He's playing blue collar guys, sometimes in the Midwest of America, and there's a lot of people like that in America who drive trucks and live in the Midwest of America, and Hollywood doesn't represent those people on screen often, and he certainly doesn't now, not in mainstream or bigger films. And when Clint Eastwood makes films like Gran Torino or The Mule, or going back, he is representing, elements, for want of a better expression, of Trump's America. And I think that's why he's still popular. The Mule made $100 million at the American box office, I think about 160 worldwide. Now, that came out last year. He was 89. He had his first hit in the American box office in 1966, 67, I think, 66, 67. There's no actor in history who's had a hit film and another hit film over 52 years. The only person I think will possibly come close to that is Tom Cruise. He's been a star now 37 years, so he's got a shot at beating Clint. But John Wayne, Paul Newman, all those guys, Clark Gable, you could go right back into history of film. Sean Connery, they never. That's because Connery retired really, but they never had us run as long as Clint. But The Mule's worth checking out. It's an interesting story, yeah, Clint still directs films and is still worth seeing. I need to see his new film Richard Jewell, which is about a guy who was falsely accused of a bomb plot in Atlanta. Again, it's looking at a blue-collar guy. It's looking at parts of America or characters within the American landscape that other filmmakers wouldn't look at necessarily. So, that's why the guy is still, he's still out there doing it. Clint Eastwood, legend.